Hi, this is Peter Godinez. Yes, your host of Your Pivot Journey. You know, I got to tell you, when I came to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo as a freshman, I had no idea the people, the personalities I was going to get a chance to meet when I got there. But looking back, now I get a chance to see some of the significant people that I actually met my freshman year in 1976. And one of those athletes, students, human beings, was her name was Jani Rouda, but now she married some pole vaulter guy, and now her name is Jani Rouda Johnson. So with that, she's somebody who is a pioneer for women's sports, for women in life in general. And so I want to introduce you to Jani. So Jani, why don't you say hello to our audience?
Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me, Pete.
But my first question is, how did the upbringing in the 60s and the 70s influence your career and life as a female athlete?
Yeah, that's such a good question that I've thought about a lot through my life because I had a unique childhood being raised in New Zealand. I was born in California and went to New Zealand when I was 4 and part of a very large family. And we ended up by the beach. And if you knew 60s New Zealand, it was very much you run everywhere, you live on the beach, you run around barefoot, and you go to all Catholic girls' school, which I did, in a very simple but also beautiful childhood. And my athleticism really started there, I think, because that's how it was. You're swimming in the ocean, you're running to the movies, you were running to a school. And so that set the stage for me to just have a lifestyle that I really loved. And as that evolved, when I came back to the States, I was a year in San Jose and then a year in Hawaii. And we landed back in California in Santa Ynez just like a month before my freshman year in high school. And because of the Kennedy physical fitness that was happening at the time, where they were assessing people's fitness, I was in physical fitness assessment my freshman year, and I was only 13. I had skipped a grade and a half when we came back from New Zealand. So I was very young, but my track coach eventually was the woodshop teacher right by the track. And he saw me doing the physical fitness, and he got the team captain, who was Carla Tibbetts, to find me in St. Inez High School. Like we had 700 or 800 kids total, and to recruit me for the team. And so hence I became a member of the track team. And little did I know that Coach Stensland was actually the overall coach of the Santa Barbara County Track Club for women. And this was a big deal in the 60s and 70s because basically they were taking the best women in the state of California and taking them to AAU meets. So we were going every weekend to Hanford, to LA, to Bakersfield, and we were competing not only in high school, but also at that AAU level. And so the 60s and early 70s, until I left St. Inez High School at age 16 in 1972, I was second in the state of California in the 800 meters, but I had nowhere to go. So my parents left the country in July, the month after I left high school, and they told me to go with my sister in Santa Barbara and good luck. And so I went to Santa Barbara, and I just basically for the first 2 years just got a job at Kenny's shoe store. And I also worked for odd jobs, but I had nowhere to go. So basically I just played a lot and had fun in Santa Barbara and worked to make a living to support myself. Then what ended up happening is that I started Santa Barbara City College in 1974. So now I'm about 19 or 20. And but still, there were no programs there like there are today for women, but Title IX had passed. So I went there for a year and I just went into physical education because it's something I loved. But what ended up happening is my brother-in-law, who was a Cal Poly graduate, knew that that Title IX had passed, and he could actually in those days help me get into Cal Poly. So that whole physicality of being an athlete and growing up very physical and having success in high school kind of set the bar for me at Cal Poly. And so when I arrived there, basically there were a handful of us that were under AIAW, which was then the governing body of women's athletics in track and field. So my brother-in-law got me into Cal Poly, and through that process, I ended up just kind of training there and making nationals in 3 months. And I probably lost like 10 or 15 pounds too, because keep in mind, I've been out of high school for 2 or 3 years. Myself and Janet Benford, who was a high hurdler, made it to nationals in Corvallis, Oregon. And we both made the finals. I think Janet might have gotten 5th or 6th, and I think I got 9th in finals. But that set the stage. More importantly, that Title IX passed in 1972, and Cal Poly had 3 years to implement it. So that summer, we're going to have 6 scholarships for women, 2 in track and field, 2 in softball, 2 in basketball. And Janet and I, of course, being the 2 national qualifiers, were lucky enough to get those 2. And so when Coach Miller arrived, which was like maybe a year or so later, we were already training under a woman that they had hired who was not a professional or a high-level coach. And I had come from this program that I described to you. And so I actually had a high bar, and the high bar was the men's team. And so that being said, myself and now Maggie Kais comes into the picture in the fall, who ended up being, she's in the Hall of Fame. She ended up running at a very high level for Athletics West and Nike. So for a quarter or 2 of training with the women's team, Maggie and myself and Janet, we went to Evie Pellaton, who was the athletic director for women at the time, and said, hey, we want to train with the men. Steve Simmons, who really he was my first year person there that was the men's coach. He encouraged us to, hey, maybe we can get you guys, you're good runners, come in. And then Steve Miller was hired. And so at that time, we got permission to actually move over to the men's team, which was huge. And then the bar was high again, because here comes Steve, and here comes a team that in my tenure at Cal Poly ended up winning the Division II national championship in cross country. So I guess the point of my influence is I had good influence, unusually as a high schooler, but after a liaison of 2 or 3 years, I was super hungry to get into what I knew I was good at. And that was running, and that was being in physical fitness, and eventually being in teaching. But like the excitement and what I've seen so far with the interviews that you have done and our Google Meet of 2 months ago now or so, is that we ended up like connecting how special it was, not only for the men that came from all walks of life. And Coach Miller not only brought those men all together, but brought the select group of women that could hang with the men's team. I mean, it wasn't easy. We were doing grueling 100-mile weeks, or trying to do, with the men's team. And I didn't even run cross country in high school. I was a cheerleader and then a track runner. So I was a little underprepared. Yeah. So that's how I felt about that era. Oh, as I mentioned, Dr. Evie Pellaton was a huge influence. but Dr. Bacola was really who I worked with most. And he's probably, if you ask me, the most special person from Cal Poly is Dr. Bacola. I mean, Steve Miller, he speaks for himself. He is a force, and he was a force for all of us. But Dr. Bacola was really the wind behind those wings, if that's a kind of a corny phrase, but like Dr. Bacola in that era allowed us to, well, first of all, he gave me a job in the athletics office.
How did it actually affect you as a coach, and again as a parent? And I'm hoping to talk a little bit about being married to this special guy. I forget his name, but I'll remember in a second. And then having two world-class children, a son and a daughter, which we'll talk to. But what were some of the things you got from the Cal Poly experience that affected those in the journey of your life?
I basically had tuition and fees. So I had a work grant through the athletics office, which Dr. Bacola enabled me to be able to get. And then also, I mentioned Steve Simmons. And so it was a family there. And Dr. Bacola was way ahead of his time in allowing and encouraging the women with Evie Pellaton to allow us to compete with the men. And then Steve Miller embraced it. So it was a whole team, really, two athletic directors that were right on for their age of what was happening at the time. And then Steve Miller to say, yeah, we'll take good women. If they can hang and do the training, let's go. Like, that's pretty great for that era. I mean, if you weren't there, you don't really fully understand that, but like that was very brave of him, and also enabled the women to keep our bar raised, because we had a lot of women that were coming from high bars. Maggie Kais, Kate Kais, Eileen Kramer, women that are in the Hall of Fame now. They came from high bars, and they were allowed to have a high bar there. And then Cal Poly did the best thing once Steve left, was to hire Lance Harder, who I ended up training with later in my post-collegiate years. So they got top-rate coaches for those women. Good job, Cal Poly.
I would agree with you, and I really look back and believe that as a result of both the men and the women working together in collaboration and really respecting and enjoying each other's. Yeah. I think it's an example of future is that when people actually work together, yeah. I mean, the outcome is just incredible, and it's something that you can talk about, as kind of a historical success that we're all kind of experiencing with the Cal Poly connection that we have here.
Yeah. To address one more part of the
Sure.
question you asked,
sure.
Is like, how did it mold you to go into being a teacher and coach? Because one of the things that we saw in our Zoom call was, we've got people that are computer great. We've got people who are successful in all areas of business and very successful people. And one of the things that I want to say is I took something from Coach Simmons, from Coach Miller, from Dr. Bacola, who I consider also a teacher, and the great teachers at Cal Poly. But like, I really knew early on the coaches that I had through high school and even back to junior high, I had teachers who were coaches and coaches who were teachers. And I knew I wanted to do that. And I think I alluded to that when we had our Zoom call with Coach Miller, and I said how he inspired all of us when I talked about going to cross country nationals. But like, I've really tried to carry that on, and it's not something that is hard, because when you love what you do, like, I still feel that. That's still why I'm teaching at a club after retiring from Cuesta, is I knew that was my destiny. Like, I knew I had to be a teacher and a coach. Honestly, there could be, I can't even think of any other career that I could have had. And so I already knew that as a young person, but it was instilled in me with the people around me. And Lance Harder, probably one of the best coaches I've ever been around, because Coach Miller was inspirational to me, but he didn't coach me as much as Lance Harder did when I was in my 30s, post-collegiately, and when I was running for Reebok Aggies and so forth. And I literally went from his guidance right into a job at Cuesta. And I got the job at Cuesta because I was so successful as a road racer and a mom and trying to make the Olympic trials. So part of that was Lance Harder helping me after I had my master's and married Jan. And, Jan, of course, I mean, that I could talk to you for 10 minutes about Jan and how influential he was to me. But those experiences at Cal Poly were why I became a teacher and a coach. I knew I had to do that. And Jan was the person that got me into grad school in Southern Illinois. Jan was the one that said, you can do this. And he's probably one of the biggest advocates for women in the sport that you'll ever meet, honestly.
From a standpoint of your life, if you want to just go ahead and comment more in regards to some of the influences, because you not only are a wife, you're a mother, I almost want you're a coach, you're a teacher. You have to spend you're a nurse too at one time. What things have you done in your careers that I'm missing here?
Well, like that, I don't know. You know how it is. It just sort of all evolves in the career, and it's kind of fantastic because I worked for 12 years as a part-time instructor at Cuesta, and myself and another woman, Sherry Moore, started the wellness program for people at Cuesta, and that's a huge piece of what I believe in. And now I'm going to be working in the fall in the grade schools, helping with kids' fitness. So that's one influence. Like I've always, since I retired, that's one of the main goals I had when I retired, a few years ago, was to make sure that I was serving that need in the schools. But when my kids were growing up, like that's a reason why I was part-time and why Jan was working so much. He was working full-time for sportswear companies and at the same time running sky jumpers. And he did that because, we basically took Clay and Chelsea in whatever direction they wanted to. And they were both Clay into surfing, Chelsea into track and field, but she was also huge in volleyball and soccer. So like, I guess the moral of all that is like, if you truly believe in the best of competing and of sports, in my mind, it should be because you want to do it. And Chelsea has been driven since she came out of the womb, basically. And Clay's a different bird. Clay's as gifted physically as Chelsea, but went in another direction, which is into surfing and into more like individual sports. But Chelsea, she's an exceptional human being in sport. And that's her, she was driven to do that. And I remember telling her when I was like 10, she was about 10 years old, and I was in my 40s, hey, Chelsea, the world is your oyster. And so that's my message, is that like I hope for all of us that have been affected by these great coaches and teachers that we keep on doing. And I think like what I've seen, I can speak for what I saw with Rob Castleman and with Terry Bauer. I know Terry pretty well, and he's an amazing dad and a teacher, and he was a great athlete. Like that's kind of a great thing to be able to say and to try to aspire to. And that's honestly how I feel. Like I hope I can spend the rest of my life helping people to be better teachers and coaches. That's what I want to do. And that's what gives me joy, and that's basically my message. Cal Poly was truly learned by doing for me.